I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped outside and watched my entire stack of firewood sprint away on two tin legs like a pair of terrified hamsters, carrying a log cabin between them. It took my brain a full 3 seconds to register that what I was actually seeing was Karen from the HOA, half waddling, half speed walking, dragging an armful of my split hickory across my backyard like she had every legal right to relocate it in broad daylight. She didn't even look at me when I shouted her name. She just flinched, picked up her pace, and muttered something about community resource redistribution, as if my woodpile had been approved for public consumption. That was the moment I realized our neighborhood had officially lost its mind. You need to understand something about this woman. Karen doesn't knock. She announces, and usually her announcements begin with the phrase, "by the authority vested in me," followed by something absolutely no one vested in her. She wears a pastel windbreaker like it's a badge of office and carries a clipboard filled with handwritten rules she believes the neighborhood should follow, even though none of them exist in the actual HOA charter. Last month, she fined a guy for owning a lawnmower too powerful for the aesthetic of the street. Another time, she tried to get a teenage girl evicted for hanging a crystal prism in her window because she claimed the reflections caused migraines. So when I say finding her stealing my firewood wasn't even the strangest thing she's done, I need you to know she operates on a spiritual level of entitlement most humans will never achieve. I walked toward her as calmly as a man can when watching his property disappear like a magic trick. She finally turned when she hit her backyard gate, panting like she just run a marathon she never trained for. She held up one finger, signaling for me to wait while she caught her breath, as though this interaction was happening on her schedule. When she finally found her voice, she said she was confiscating my firewood because she believed my stack was a safety hazard that didn't reflect the values of the community. I asked her which values, specifically, required her to haul off my property in broad daylight, like she was repo-ing a car. She said, without blinking, environmental stewardship. I stared at her, confused, because the woman drives a lifted SUV with bumper stickers bragging about horsepower. I told her to put the wood down. She told me she had already logged the violation, and that the wood was now technically hers until I went through the appeal process. I reminded her that I wasn't appealing anything because she had no authority to take my stuff. She adjusted her sunglasses, pulled out her phone, and snapped a picture of me like she was gathering evidence for a fictional courtroom she planned on holding in her living room. When I stepped forward to take back what she had stolen, she shouted for her husband, who lumbered out of the house wearing cargo shorts and a confused expression he seems to reserve exclusively for HOA-related emergencies. He put his hands up like he was defusing a hostage situation. He told me he'd just bring the wood back later, as if this was a totally normal misunderstanding where someone had borrowed my stapler without asking. Karen's face twitched at that, and she hissed at him to go back inside. Then she dragged the wood into her garage and slammed the door. That should have been the end of it. A weird, annoying incident I'd tell friends about over dinner. But when I checked my door later that afternoon, there was a bright orange citation taped to it accusing me of reckless firewood storage and charging me a fine that cost more than the entire woodpile. I crumpled the notice and walked to her house to talk like adults, which was optimistic of me. She answered the door with the expression of someone who had been preparing a speech. She informed me that the wood I had stacked posed a combustion threat because it was too close to a fence. It wasn't. She informed me that she had every right to seize hazardous materials. She didn't. She informed me that if I wanted it back, I would have to attend the next HOA board meeting and plead my case. I asked her when the meeting was. She said she hadn't scheduled it yet. I asked if the rest of the board even knew she was doing this. She said they would be notified at an appropriate time. That was the moment I realized she fully believed she was the board. So I did the reasonable thing. I walked away and decided to let it go. I figured she'd either return the wood on her own or get distracted by some other perceived violation, like a mailbox being too cheerful. But the next morning, my woodpile was half the size it had been, and by lunchtime it was gone completely. That day, as I stood staring at the empty space where my winter fuel had once been, a neighbor walking his dog stopped to chat. He shifted uncomfortably when I asked if he knew what happened. After a moment, he confessed that Karen had been offering free firewood to approved homeowners as part of a neighborhood warmth initiative. She had been distributing my property like party favors at a birthday celebration I wasn't invited to. I thanked him, went inside, and sat at my kitchen table with the kind of silent fury that makes you understand why ancient civilizations built catapults. I wanted to confront her again, but Karen thrived on confrontation. She wore like sunscreen. Yelling at her wouldn't solve anything. Filing a complaint wouldn't do anything either. She would just claim it was retaliation. Getting the actual HOA involved was an option, but that would take months, and by then she'd probably annex my garden too. I needed something smarter, calmer, cleaner, something that wouldn't get me arrested but would make a statement she couldn't twist or weaponize. And that's when I remembered the hollow logs in my shed. Years ago, as a joke, a friend gave me a box of novelty firewood for a camping prank that never happened. The logs were hollow, meant to be filled with small charges of compressed air that made them explode with a loud bang when burned. Useless, silly things, completely harmless, but extremely startling. I had tossed them in storage and forgotten about them. Until that moment, I walked to my shed, brushed off the dust, and inspected them. I didn't need to do anything dangerous. I didn't even need real explosives. Just a little flash powder from some leftover celebration poppers, and the original mechanism would work fine. They'd burn for several minutes before releasing a sharp crack loud enough to send someone launching out of a lawn chair. It wouldn't hurt anyone, but it would absolutely make a point. I spent the afternoon preparing 6 hollow logs. Not too many. Just enough to make sure whoever was helping themselves to my firewood would get the message. Then I stacked them neatly where my real firewood used to be and waited. At dusk, I saw a familiar pastel windbreaker creeping across my yard again. She moved like someone trying to look casual while committing a misdemeanor. She glanced around, confirmed I wasn't outside, and scooped up the decoy logs with a triumphant smile like she'd just recovered stolen relics. She carried them home. I didn't know it yet, but this would be the smallest twist of the entire ordeal. The first crack in a disaster that would spiral far beyond firewood, far beyond Karen, far beyond anything I imagined possible. And the explosion, that night, wasn't the one I would come to regret. I didn't hear the first explosion. I felt it, a deep, hollow thump that shivered through the fence panels and rattled the ice in my glass. It wasn't loud enough to be dangerous, but it was definitely loud enough to be confusing. A flock of birds shot out of the maple tree, like they'd been launched from a slingshot. Somewhere down the street, a dog began barking with the tone of an animal, convinced the apocalypse had arrived 3 minutes early. I set my drink down, leaned forward in my chair, and listened. There was a moment of perfect silence, the kind that only happens when everyone in a 5-house radius freezes in place trying to figure out whether they imagine something. Then came the second crack. Sharper, quicker, like a gunshot filtered through a cardboard tube. After that, a very distinct sound rolled across the neighborhood. The panicked, high-pitched screech of a woman who'd just been violently jump-scared by her own fireplace. I took a slow sip. I knew exactly whose voice that was. For a full 20 seconds, I heard frantic scrambling, the chaotic thuds of someone sprinting across hardwood floors, cabinets slamming, muffled yelling, the metallic crash of fireplace tools hitting the ground. Finally, her garage door flew open. Karen burst out wearing oven mitts, of all things, waving a smoking fireplace log held at arm's length like it was a radioactive alien egg. She sprinted toward her driveway and hurled the log into the street, then leaped back like she expected it to detonate on impact. Her husband came stumbling out behind her, holding a fire extinguisher upside down. He looked confused, terrified, and somehow betrayed all at once, like the universe had turned on him personally. Neighbors emerged from their houses one by one, peering over hedges, clutching mugs, blinking drowsily at the spectacle. Karen pointed at the smoking log and screamed, "He tried to blow up my house." That was my cue. I stood, stretched, and walked toward the street with the casual pace of a man who had absolutely nothing to hide. A half-dozen neighbors turned to me like I was stepping into a spotlight. Karen stomped toward me with the righteous rage of someone who believed she was starring in a courtroom drama and had just delivered the perfect gotcha moment. She held the log toward me like it was Exhibit A. "This came from your property," she shrieked. "You set a trap. A trap. I looked down at the log, still steaming faintly, and tilted my head. "That," I said, "is one of the logs you stole." She sputtered. "It was hazardous. You created a public danger." "So, you admit you took it?" I replied calmly. She froze. Half the watching neighbors murmured. Her husband cleared his throat and attempted to gently lower her arm, probably hoping she'd do literally anything other than continue incriminating herself in front of half the cul-de-sac. Karen jerked her arm away and pointed the log at me like a microphone. "You intentionally placed an explosive on your property where I could be injured retrieving it." "Well, you weren't supposed to be retrieving anything," I said, "because it wasn't yours." Her jaw clenched so tightly I thought I heard a tooth crack. She shouted for someone to call 911. She demanded an investigation. She declared that I had violated several subsections of a safety ordinance that didn't exist. Then she stormed back toward her house, dragging her bewildered husband behind her, while neighbors exchanged looks that ranged from amused to exhausted. I expected that to be the end of it. A dramatic scene, some gossip, maybe a passive-aggressive note on the community message board. But the thing about Karen is that she doesn't lose quietly. She doesn't even lose privately. Losing, to her, is an existential threat. So the next morning, when I stepped onto my porch, I saw something that made me blink twice. A police cruiser was parked in my driveway. The officer stepped out friendly, calm, polite, not tense, which was a good sign. He asked if we could chat, and I invited him inside. He explained that a resident had filed a complaint alleging that I constructed an explosive booby trap. He said it with a straight face, but his eyes flicked upward with the kind of expression people use when trying not to roll them. I walked him through everything. The theft, the fines, the self-appointed authority, the fake violations, the repeated trespassing. I even showed him the hollow novelty logs, empty and harmless. When I explained the prank mechanism, he chuckled, then immediately coughed like he wasn't supposed to. "So, they're like joke firecrackers?" he asked. "Pretty much." "Non-lethal?" he checked. "Completely. Property of yours the whole time?" "Yep." "Stolen by the person complaining about them?" "Correct." He closed his notebook. "All right then," he said. "I'll file this under civil dispute." He headed for the door, then paused. "Just a heads up, she asked me to arrest you for domestic terrorism." I blinked. Domestic terrorism? He winced. She used that phrase 6 times. After he left, I figured Karen had finally burned her last bridge with the authorities. Surely, a false report terrorism would be the moment the HOA stepped in. But you have to understand, Karen had spent years weaving herself into the HOA like a vine wrapping around a fence. She controlled it through sheer volume. Whoever shouted loudest won, and no one shouted louder than her. That afternoon, the HOA president, an exhausted man named Leonard who perpetually looked like his soul was trying to escape his body, knocked on my door. He held a stack of papers, so thick it looked like a college thesis. He sighed before speaking. "I need to ask about the log situation." I walked him through everything again. He rubbed his temples like he was massaging out a demon. Finally, he said, "She wants to hold an emergency board meeting tonight." "About what?" He flipped through the papers. "A new rule proposal banning combustible prank materials." Combustible prank materials. I repeated. "She also wants to introduce a motion to censure you for being robbed, for creating an unsafe emotional environment." Her words. I stared at him. Leonard stared back. We were both tired for different reasons. Then he leaned closer, lowered his voice, and whispered, "I need you at that meeting. She's rallying votes. If you don't show up, she'll pass everything." I didn't want to go. HOA meetings are where hope goes to die. But if I didn't, she'd rewrite the neighborhood rule book with me as the villain. So that evening, I walked into community center expecting a small crowd. Instead, the place was packed. People crammed into folding chairs, leaning against walls, fanning themselves with pamphlets. Karen sat at the front table like she was presiding over a royal tribunal, wearing a blazer that screamed fake authority. Her husband sat beside her, looking like a hostage who'd given up negotiating. The moment I entered, she stood and addressed the crowd. "There he is," she announced. "The instigator." A ripple spread through the room. I took my seat calmly. She launched into her speech, weaving a tale of villainy so dramatic I half expected her to accuse me of setting medieval siege traps around my property. According to her, I had orchestrated a calculated campaign to destabilize the community, endanger homeowners, and threaten the peaceful operation of neighborhood life. Then came the twist. She held up a photo. My yard, my shed, zoomed in, the door slightly open. Inside, visible on a shelf, were the remaining hollow logs, taken from an angle no one could capture unless they were physically standing inside my backyard. Her voice rose triumphantly. Proof of intent. The room went quiet, not because they believed her, but because they realized what the photo meant. Someone had been in my yard again. Her husband shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted to Karen, then to me, his face twisted with guilt. I saw it instantly. He took the photo. And that was when everything changed. Not because of the picture, but because of who else recognized him. His brother, sitting 3 rows back, with a look of dawning horror. He stood, pointed, and shouted, "You went into his yard again? Are you serious?" Gasps rippled. Karen froze. Her husband said nothing, and the room exploded. Not the kind in fireplaces, but the kind where secrets rupture, alliances shatter, and reputations implode. That night, the real war began, and the next twist would make exploding firewood look like a warm-up act.